Welcome to Season 2 of BSI's flagship production entitled On the Grind. I'm your host, William A. Neal, Communications and Government Affairs Officer for Belize Sugar Industries Limited, BSI. As you may know, On the Grind is a magazine-style broadcast show designed to inform, educate, and communicate with viewers the way the northern sugar industry works. Our hope remains that we'll provide insight into the northern sugar industry, demonstrate the way things work from the farm to the factory and everything in between as we work on transforming the industry to face with excellence the challenges, especially those born from climate change. The show, produced internally by the BSI Communications Department, highlights people, projects, and programs aimed at continuing the industry's transformation and evolution on the road to sustainability. Positive changes abound across the sugar belt, but because of its history of contention and controversy, the northern sugar industry is often overlooked and undervalued outside of the north. We hope to boost the image of the industry nationally, regionally, and globally by sharing the ways it is transforming while remaining a fundamental agro-productive contributor for economic and social growth of the entire country, not just the north. Modernization, digitalization, automation, energy efficiency, innovation, and cutting-edge technology drive transformation while improving environmental stewardship. We are on the move from field to factory and shipping logistics, and invite you to bear witness through these video vignettes. In this new season, we start things off differently with the first 2 episodes focusing on sustainability. In today's episode, we will have a sit-down studio interview, another out and about segment, and our People Spotlight in collaboration with our HR department. Rev up, we're on the grind. Let's get into our show. Our in-studio chat is with Senior Director of Sustainability for ASR, Dr. Daryl Sabourin. In this first sit-down, he stresses the need for efficient and sustainable practices in industrial operations, the importance of establishing best practices and working with NGOs to achieve a balance between economic development and environmental preservation. Daryl joined ASR after a military career and was recruited to manage the natural resources in and around the Domino Sugar facility in Baltimore, which operates in the heart of an urban area much like Tower Hill. We start off talking about balance between what we do and the environment in which we operate. Can we strike the balance? Here's Daryl.
We certainly can. It's not going to be easy. If it was easy, you wouldn't see the turmoil and in essence fear that we're seeing in today with the UN and the COP26s and the protests. Right? It's there because rightfully so. There's fear. The more we unbalance a system, the more it can't bring itself back into balance. And if it was easy just to look at it and go, oh, we just stop doing this one thing and we can keep doing what we're doing every day and everything's fine. It's just that one thing. We would have already done that, right? That if it was just down to that, we would have already done that. It just wouldn't be a problem. But it's not that. It's a series of different systems that interact. It is the fact that if we come in and we say, oh, this is now only farming, and we're not going to preserve the natural wildlife or the ecosystem and everything else, then sooner or later, the farming fails because the ecosystem around it fails, right? So it's all interlinked, and it's understanding how we as humans not only have a responsibility to do the fostering of that development, but what do we do to make it as efficient as possible so as many things can happen on the same plot of land as possible, as naturally possible.
Now, very often when we have this kind of a conversation, people think it's just talk. But how can you move from talk to concrete action?
Yeah, I can tell you that what we're working on is a lot of what is best practice, and we're working with the NGOs in the area to say what is best practice when we want to reforest an area. What is best practice when we want to move something to where it's still profitable and business oriented, but also provides that balance with the ecosystem around it. And it's about really establishing who's done what where and what worked, and really bringing that together. Now, there's going to be some difficult decisions in our future, right? Because sometimes one thing may not be as profitable, but it's more friendly for the ecosystem around it. And that's where sustainability still looks at the profitability. If it's profitable at all, and it's better than something that's massively profitable but doesn't care about the environment and doesn't care about the people, guess which one you should do? Give up some of that really heavy profitability for balance. And that's the goal.
Very often people too think this is a binary kind of existence.
Mhm.
It's either or.
Yeah.
But sustainability, by definition,
Yeah.
what does that suggest in terms of
It's
not being binary?
Yeah, it's absolutely at the same time, right? Everything in balance and at the same time. And we had a great example. We were talking to some of the NGOs up north yesterday, and they talked about how we can do, an agricultural type operation that grows the trees over a period of 20 years. And each year after it hits maturity, it can cultivate and be almost like a retirement plan for your entire family. If you did it right, it would be perpetual and profitable and desirable, but also a great pathway for the jaguar to make its way through, or the great pathway for the rest of the ecosystem to survive, or the birders to come back in, and which talks to ecotourism and talks to this and talks to that. They all harmonize if done in balance.
Now, for Belize, which is a small developing country, there's huge pressure,
Mm.
external pressures to say that you are to maintain as much as possible
Mhm.
in terms of your natural ecosystems. And then on the other hand, people are saying, but you're foregoing the development that the country also needs.
Right.
So how do you navigate that kind of a conversation with people? Because you spoke about profitability, is it worth it, and at what cost?
Right.
So how do you navigate that conversation?
I would say that even the NGOs that are saying we need to preserve as much of the natural lands as possible recognize that even they need profitability in that space to keep it policed and keep it managed and keep it preserved. And even they look at it and go, okay, so what is the profitability by leaving it untouched? And for every time we think about that, right? Think about the ecotourism component that comes from it. Think about the fact that you do have greater biodiversity, which means greater livelihoods of this next thing down the stream, right? That profits from the increased biodiversity, because we're all interconnected when it comes down to the food chain, right? It's about finding those things, even though you're preserving, right? There's still a take, there's still a profitability of that very thriving ecosystem. And it's about putting an understanding to that and then incentivizing it and sharing the wealth that comes from that that's been left in the core.
Now, you come from a very developed country background. And here we are as a developing country. And the first thing people may say is, well, our footprint is negligible in the scheme of things.
Yeah.
So why is there such a push here when, as you spoke about COP and all of that, there's very little happening on that
Yeah.
other side?
Yeah. So I will say that Belize is always impressive to me, because when I come in, I can see the uniqueness of what is already, in essence, a very balanced system. And what I mean by that is you think about the way you make energy here: largely hydro, largely biofuel, largely green energy. And in fact, the only detrimental impact of the energy you're using from a climate change perspective is when you have to buy excess energy from your neighbors, right? It's been produced through non-green or non-renewable sources. But Belize is balancing itself already, right? And that's what makes Belize of particular interest to the rest of the world, because you can be a model that this is what it should have been. This is where we should get back to. And same thing with the way you've preserved through the acts that have preserved your natural lands, right? So your Coxcomb Basin to the south, and how that's protected by legislation, and how that is moved from preserved ecosystem to a thriving ecosystem. It's moved to I think we got the great privilege of going down and talking to the staff down there, and they've moved to just over 105 tracked cats, where they had around 60 tracked cats back in the 80s. That shows that development. And there's certainly interest from the rest of the world to learn from you and to emulate that. So it's easy to say, well, we're kind of underdeveloped, and why is everybody interested? Everybody wants to learn from what you've done. Now, is there opportunity for development still to bring that into Belize? Absolutely. And that's also the intent, and that's also the hope, is that we find that balance as you need to grow, which everybody wants to have a more solid, resolved, or definitive future for you and your family. We're not, everybody wants to certainly foster that, but not lose that uniqueness in balance with the environment around you.
Now, one of the final questions I have is, climate change has been a conversation that has been in public spaces for quite some time, but it's still kind of undefined for a lot of people, because it seems like you're talking about weather, you're talking about mitigation, you're talking about so many other parts. What would you say to the average person when it comes to climate change and what it should mean and why it should mean something to them?
So, the biggest thing for climate change is that it makes a stable system unstable. And the biggest thing I'll point to for people in Belize that really you can relate to is look at your rainy seasons. What used to be able to be set on your watch and say, well, this is when the rains are going to fall and this is when the rains are going to stop. What are they now? Well, maybe it's next month. Maybe it's the month after that. And then when do the rains stop? Well, maybe they haven't stopped yet, or maybe they have. And think about how that shift, that change in patterns and conditions have impacted all of your industrial efforts, all of your farming efforts, all of your tourism efforts. This is a direct relation to climate change. We always hear about the increased number of storms. You guys get that a lot too from the hurricanes and the increase. You always hear about that, but really those subtle changes that may change your entire dynamic and how you perceive what and how you should farm is also part of that. It's all related to how we've handled the emissions into the air, and it's driving these patterns and these changes. Once again, it's a system. But those are the things that really you look to and go, these micro changes are having an impact. And you might not even be the biggest cause. It might be someone in that developed world that's way far away that emitted it, but it caused that cascade. And that's the difficulty. We can't do it just us. We can't do it just Belize. We can't do it just ASR with our collection of global entities. It is the globe together that has to realize the system and figure out ways to fix it.
Now, you, at the final part of your response just now, you triggered something in my mind's eye, talking about the networking that is necessary to have the impact. But how do you get buy-in and people not see you as a cash cow coming in to necessarily fix a situation?
That's certainly difficult, right? Every industry is built on margins, and some margins are shorter than others. And certainly in the agricultural world, when you're at the mercy of what the stock market and exchange is, your margins are more marginal than others, right? So to all of a sudden turn around and go, although you've been making profitability and everything's working fine, we want you to redo the way you've done your business. Change the very center core because you can't emit carbon emissions anymore. That little margin doesn't change, right? So these huge changes that we have to do around the world aren't going to come just on the business as usual model, just on the profits that already exist in any industry. But that's also why you see the UNs of the world saying, here's a pot of money, and where can we put taxes and country dollars into it? Because this transition, whether private or public, is going to cost monies well beyond the margins that currently exist. Recognize also that those margins that do exist also funnel down to all the employers and all the the people who work within that industry. It's all about equitable share within that. And the more you say, let's reduce those margins and take those profits and convert and change, you're not just harming the business, but everybody who's dependent upon it if you tip too far, right? And that's the concern. Because a person who's doing all these great things and wants to do things sustainably, if they do it only on their own within the margins that they already exist, it'll push them out of business as well, potentially. And without that balance, all those people that depend on that also fail. So it'll be a transition that has to be a global initiative, that has to see incentives, but it's also that business that says, but I can do it right now with some of this profitability I have, but I can do this part, then this part. And that's where that vision, that plan comes in about how you're going to get there. The government funds, all those things that speed it up, private or public or whatever else, is intended to speed up that process. And that's what we have to do. We have to speed up these days.
My final question. What is perhaps the priority area for you in the short term and perhaps a little bit more medium term? What would you say is a low-hanging fruit that we could reap at this point as well?
So certainly ASR has kept their focus on the greenhouse gas emission reduction and our net zero goals. We're still aiming for neutrality, which means our carbon footprint to be zero by 2040. We certainly set very proactive goals that our entire supply chain, our full boundary of not only us, but who do we buy from, needs to be zero by 2050 in that carbon profile. So that's huge, right? Between here and there, there's 1,000 steps. And it starts right now with just saying, how efficient can we get at making the same amount of sugar? Can I reduce the amount of energy it takes? And then once I get to a point where I've reduced the amount of energy it takes to each pound of sugar, what do I have to bring in for new technology that eliminates the rest of the impact of that energy? And that might be increasing the biofuels that go into the boilers here that want more green energy into grid because it's less carbon footprint. It's less that we have to buy from Mexico. It brings that number down through improvement. The first step is efficiency. So efficiency, then modification of what we do. Then we continue to say, who's on board? Look what we've done. Let's share this. Let's share what we've done. And work that zero number. But that's just one component, right? Water is going to be just as important as things progress into the future, especially in areas that are water starved or in a water stressed condition. The waste we produce, it's got to have another life and another life and another life. It can never, ever again be considered waste. It simply is on its way to something else. All of these things are priorities for us. It's just a matter of balancing what can we do in the immediate term. Where can we get leverage from those systems we talked about from the UN or others to speed up more things that might have to wait 5 or 10 years because of the margins you're working under? How can we pull everything in nice and close and still be effectively making the sugar we need to make so that everybody else can live as we make the sugar? It's a balance, right?
Well, Daryl, thank you very much for joining me today on The Grind. And I know we're working our way towards 2040. And it might sound like, a far, far away place. But so was 2000 and 2020 when we were talking about that. So best of luck in terms of the work that you continue to do. From defining sustainability and what we can do, we move to concrete steps being taken through zoo-to-zoo partnership with support from ASR. The potential for collaboration between conservationists and the agro-productive sector to protect apex predators, among others, is groundbreaking work in Belize. In this serving of our recurrent Out and About segment, Jeremy Gongora visits the best little zoo in the world.
William, for this segment, I'm at the best little zoo in the world. For those viewing, you might be wondering what we're doing here today and what's the connection between Tower Hill and the Belize Zoo. Well, let me tell you, Jaguar preservation. For this segment, we will be taking a closer look at the most powerful cat in the Northern Hemisphere, the jaguar. Although Belize has one of the healthiest populations in Central America, hunting and deforestation throughout the Americas has reduced their numbers and forced them out of their habitat. Did you know that currently there are only around 173,000 jaguars left in the world today? Accompany me to take a closer look at this incredible feline.
The Belize Zoo is one of the leading conservation education institutions in Belize. We have 40 years history of educating the Belizean public and visitors to Belize alike on the native flora and fauna of the country.
Celso Put, who has been with the Belize Zoo and Tropical Education Center since 1995, became its director in April of 2021.
I think our goal continue, our aim, our mission continue to be to educate Belizeans, to educate visitors to Belize about wildlife so that we can inspire some sort of passion for the protection of them and their habitat. Back in 2003, the zoo started working with the government of Belize to address human-jaguar conflict. Since then, we have saved and rescued more than 30 jaguars from being killed. Some of those animals were old, they were injured, they were sick, and couldn't be released back into the wild. Some of them were healthy. 2 cats in particular were shipped to the US through an exchange program, and they contributed to fresh genetic material for the captive jaguar population in zoos across North America.
One American zoo that the Belize Zoo has been engaged with is the Palm Beach Zoo. Together, they explore projects that are mutually beneficial, such as habitat connectivity within the Maya Forest Corridor, jaguar conflict mitigation, and outreach with nearby communities. This partnership has also enabled discussions regarding road ecology and monitoring of wildlife along the George Price Highway to ensure their safe movement. Margot McKnight, President and CEO of the Palm Beach Zoo, brings more than 30 years of experience leading for-profit and not-for-profit conservation and association of zoos and aquariums (AZA) organizations.
Belize already has an amazing history of having really connected outreach to the communities of how important Belize is. Ecotourism is such an important piece, right? So there is already this really strong base. So amplifying that and scaling it up, because if you don't know something, you can't act on something. But knowledge is not enough. You have to feel attached to it, right? And you have to want it. That's when things happen. So getting people attached to the jaguar specifically, the Belize Zoo has been already a pillar, but going there and seeing a cat and then understanding what that cat needs, and then how do you feel about that? And how does it affect what actions you might take? And the actions you might take are different depending upon what you do for a living, or do you have children? So it's all this fun kind of learning about your world, your life, and how is it going to be better living with an ecosystem that's intact. And the cats are just one of the symbols, right? Especially for Belize, of what you can have here.
We have brought kids like from southern Belize. We've brought kids from conflict area to come to the zoo and experience jaguars firsthand, to see the magnificence of these cats. So education is probably the biggest thing we have done to visitors coming to the zoo. Bringing people to Belize Zoo to experience the cat, the jaguar, is probably one of the most beneficial thing we do in terms of wildlife conservation. Jaguar is the apex predator. It's the top of the food chain animal for Belize, and a healthy jaguar population signifies a healthy wildlife population in general. Wildlife is an important part of Belize's tourism industry. Belize's tourism industry is an important part of the country's GDP. And so healthy jaguars, healthy wildlife, healthy tourism, good livelihood for Belizeans. So jaguar has a very wide geographic range. You can include the sightings from southern USA, maybe you can do that. So from the USA-Mexico border all the way down to Argentina. We use the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species. And on the IUCN Red List, the jaguar is listed as a near threatened species. Now, that's a very wide range. If you think about the Belize context, you think about all the threats jaguars face in Belize, then it can probably have a different designation. Threats forest loss, deforestation, and conflict with cattle farmers, roadkills. Those are probably three of the major threats for jaguars in Belize. So there are different threats in other regions. Our population is possibly stable. Around 600 to 800 jaguars is the estimate. It hasn't changed in some time, so stable population, but they continue to face threats. Urban development is at the heart of human-jaguar conflict. As urban areas expand, we're cutting down prime jaguar habitat. Jaguars are coming in contact with humans at the interface, so we're having increased jaguar conflict. In terms of climate change, we're clear-cutting large tract of forests. We're not taking into consideration watersheds. We're not taking into consideration the long-term effect of the water cycle. And so what we're seeing is that when we have extreme drought like we're currently facing in Belize, then you get wildlife and people at the interface again. So increases the chance of conflict because animals are then moving across the landscape in search of food and water, in this case with the long drought here in Belize. So animals move across the landscape for different reasons. Primarily food, shelter, and mate. And as Belize develop, we're getting animals pushed outside their regular habitat. We're getting forests fragmented. And so we need corridors. We need viable corridors for animals to move across Belize's forested landscape from southern Belize into northern Belize. The Selva Maya is the largest block of forest in the Americas north of the Amazon. The Selva Maya is shared between Belize, Mexico, and Guatemala. The Maya Forest Corridor that we're currently in connects Belize's southern forests with the Selva Maya.
I think one of the opportunities here, and we've seen it in Florida, is beyond the wildlife areas. You've got a lot of communities and practices in agriculture and farming that could really work well with these buffer zones and these corridors. Everyone wants a healthy life, right? Everyone wants to be able to have great food and great water, and a big part of that is an ecosystem that is functioning and intact. So I think there's a huge opportunity outside the traditional conservation groups that can really make this happen for jaguars. One of the things for agricultural communities and farming communities, these are green, open spaces as opposed to a city or a community that has roads and schools and people going to the grocery store. These in-between spaces that humans need and we grow our food are also potentially really good overlapping areas for wildlife to move through the habitats. We found this in Florida. Some of our best advocates for Florida panthers are the cattle owners, the ranchers, because they see their big, beautiful open ranches as a place that these panthers can go through. And sugarcane in Florida, these species can move through a green space as opposed to a city or roads. As we all know, roads are difficult for humans to cross sometimes, and animals just have not evolved to learn how to cross a road.
Corridor is important because wide range species like jaguars need a lot of land to move across the landscape. And so the corridor will provide that safe passage for them to move from point A to point B across the country's landscape. When you look at cane fields, they're a monocrop. And so when you look across a cane field landscape, all you see is sugarcane. I think if cane farmers can start incorporating small corridors to provide safe passage for wildlife, not only jaguars, but jaguar prey, so armadillos. Armadillos are one of the primary prey species for jaguar. If you can provide safe passage for prey for jaguars, then you're contributing towards jaguar conservation. I mean, you already have these clear-cut areas, and it's going to take years for you to reforest them. But if you leave corridors within the cane field, or at the end of the cane field, at the edges of the cane field, you're helping with jaguar conservation, because you're providing habitat, you're providing a home for their prey base.
So for the sugar industry and sugarcane fields being a really big part of the economy of Belize, there's a really good opportunity to say what kind of practices might change that would be more wildlife friendly, but you can still do the work and really be efficient. So those are the places that we have great opportunities to figure out. The people that grow the sugarcane know that business, and the folks that are trying to save wildlife know theirs. So let's get together and say, what changes could happen? And we don't know right now, but certainly we're smart humans. We can figure this out. I have every confidence. But I think sugarcane could play a really big part.
As we have seen, the agro-productive sector does not have to be in conflict with preservation efforts of jaguars. They can support programs like these that are critical to the survival of jaguars, and it's one of the many ways companies can show their commitment to the environment. Back to you, William, with more on the grind.
The COMS team had the opportunity to visit the Palm Beach Zoo, and here's a few pictures from that visit. BSI is the largest employer in the North, with more than 500 people powering our operations. And if you add in all the temps and casuals, that number moves closer to 700. In this second serving of People Power and Empowered, we continue to highlight the diversity, job, gender, age, among other things, of our workforce. See if you spot any familiar faces, from friends to family. You never know. With that, we've come to the end of another episode of On the Grind. Once again, we hope that it has been the right amount of edutainment, education, and entertainment on the Northern Sugar industry. Please continue to like, share, and comment as we shine a light on our Northern Sugar industry. We leave you once again with our theme song consisting of factory sounds harvested and arranged by Elric Tillett and Chandler White to capture the industrial symphony that is Tower Hill. Listen carefully, and when the siren sounds, know that we're only changing shifts because we stay on the grind 24/7 on the clock. Be sure to join us for the second part of our sustainability special, where we focus more on the national efforts in the north to strike the delicate balance between man and nature, and also work to include cane farmers and their children in conservation efforts. It's an episode you don't want to miss. Until next time, I am your host, William A. Neal. Thank you for tuning in.